The three most prominent Glasgow tobacco lords were William Cunningham, Alexander Spears and John Glassford. Much has been written about all three, in particular detailing how they and others developed the trade, ran their businesses and with whom. In more recent times, the issue of Glasgow's involvement with slavery in the American colonies and the Caribbean islands has been more vigorously explored. It's clear that the success of the colonial tobacco trade owes much to the use of slaves in Virginia and Maryland. The reason we are looking at this historic information today is so that we can ascertain the history of the area in Glasgow in Merchant City known as Glassford Street. This area has fascinated me since I accidentally found out its history as part of an impromptu ghost hunting visit earlier in the year. I deliberately try not to know any information about a location before I visit, and so, when I was in the nightclub in a basement on Glassford Street, all I knew was that it was part of Merchant City in Glasgow, and it's one of the oldest parts of the city. Researching the origins of Glassford Street, I have now discovered that John Glassford purchased the Shawfield Mansion at the bottom of modern-day Glassford Street, and it faced onto Argyle Street. This was in the year 1745. Glassford's main business was the Virginia trade in tobacco, an industry built on slave labour, and this was where he made and lost most of his fortune. Neil Jameson, Glassford's factor, was also involved in the slave trade to the Carolinas. When Glassford died in his new mansion at the other end of Glasgow, he was almost £93,000 in debt, ruined by his losses in America. The Shawfield Mansion has a history of tumultuous events. It was actually built by Daniel Campbell of Shawfield in 1711 and stood at the foot of modern-day Glassford Street. A central staircase served the 4 apartments on the first floor, and the front was decorated with a Doric cornice and balustrade. Then, in 1725, the mansion was the scene of an infamous riot. Many Glaswegians blamed Campbell, the MP for the Clyde boroughs, for the passing of an Act of Parliament imposing a 2p, that's less than 1p equivalent today, tax on Scottish malt. Fearing the worst, Campbell packed up his valuables and fled the city with his family. On the night of the 24th of June, the day after the passing of the Act, rioting Glaswegians sacked the mansion. On the 25th of June, in further rioting, several people were killed and wounded by soldiers who'd been sent to the city to help preserve law and order. 20 years later, Prince Charles Edward Stuart stayed in the mansion between December 1745 and January 1746. Bonnie Prince Charlie is said to have met his mistress Clementina Walkinshaw there. So, where exactly was the mansion, home of John Glassford, in respect to the building that I was investigating? Now a popular coffee shop, the mansion used to stand on the corner, and there's a plaque commemorating this. The reason this is crucial information for my archives is that the building I was visiting was originally called Mansion House before being called Tiger Tiger and eventually its modern-day name, Slay. As far as we can tell, the basement is the original basement area from where the mansion was built in 1711. Daniel Campbell commissioned Shawfield to be built in around 1712. The building survived until 1792 when it was demolished, and there is little surviving evidence about it. Luckily, however, we know what it looked like, as the drawing of it was included in Volume 2 of Vitruvius Britannicus, a book published by its architect, Colin Campbell. Interestingly, the Shawfield Mansion straddles the late 17th century, when Glasgow's centre was the High Street and Trongate, to the early mid-18th century, when the town started to expand with developments such as the new Town Hall, St Andrew's in the Square and Argyle Street to the west. The property was soon absorbed into Glasgow's new town westward growth, and was planned to be built according to the very latest British Palladium style of architecture. This was the first urban villa of this kind in Scotland. Located a short distance from the town castle chambers at the Tolbooth in Trongate, the Shawfield Mansion had been a 3-storey urban villa which served as Campbell's headquarters, while its location made meetings with magistrates and other businesses a lot easier. It also had Campbell's counting room, where he managed his business affairs and finances. In many ways, Daniel Campbell's desire to build this house represented the growing ambition of the merchant class to harness their wealth and extend their influence at home and abroad. It was this ambition that really drove forward the development of 18th century Glasgow, which included new docks, quays, roads, bridges, warehousing and other important businesses, all supporting an expanding city economy. The mansion did not, however, make it through to the early part of the 18th century unscathed. Having survived the threat of destruction during the Jacobite campaign of 1715, the mansion was almost completely destroyed in 1725 by the riot previously mentioned. It's documented that the rioters smashed down its walls and roof with hammers, ripped up the floorboards and burnt the house. The sculptures in the garden were knocked down, the nearby brewhouse was dismantled, and the family's valuables were stolen. Daniel Campbell and his wife fled to Woodhall for safety, and they were never to return. The rioters' intention was to remove every trace of the house and the economic power it symbolised. So, how did John Glassford manage to acquire Shawfield Mansion? From 1710, Glasgow became the focus of an economic boom which lasted nearly 50 years. This was the age of the tobacco lords, the nouveau riche of the mid-18th century. In 1742, Glassford joined his brother-in-law Archibald Ingram in his calico print works at Pollokshaws. In or before 1745, he bought the ruinous mansion of Shawfield. Records suggest that he acquired this central site largely due to the land that it stood on. In the same year, on Christmas Day, that's when Bonnie Prince Charlie arrived and billeted at the ruinous Shawfield for 10 days to allegedly meet his mistress. By 1760, Glassford had built another mansion, White Hill House, to the northeast of Glasgow. He had been operating a tobacco business for a decade at this point. Glassford had entered the tobacco trade in 1750, further invited by Archibald Ingram to create Ingram and Glassford. He soon made a success of his venture, with a fleet of vessels and a large number of tobacco stores all across New England. Celebrated in his lifetime, Glassford was the most extensive shipowner of his generation in Scotland, and one of the 4 merchants who laid the foundation of the commercial greatness of Glasgow through the tobacco trade. Unfortunately for him, this success was not to last. The American War of Independence ruined Glasgow's part in the trade, and while other tobacco lords were shrewd enough to sell their shares in the business before the crash, Glassford was not among them. When he died at his home on the 27th of August 1783, he had debts of over £93,000. He is buried in Ramshorn Cemetery on Ingram Street in Glasgow. John Glassford had a complex and diverse family life. He first married in 1743 to Anne Coates. They had 5 children, but only Jean survived. His second wife was Anne Nisbet, and she was the 3rd daughter of Sir John Nisbet of Dean, 3rd Baronet, whom he married in 1752. There were 6 children from this marriage. Glassford then married again as his 3rd wife, Margaret Mackenzie. She was the 6th daughter of George Mackenzie, 3rd Earl of Cromarty. From this marriage he had James, Isabella and Euphemia. As one of Glasgow's leading tobacco lords, modern recognition of Glassford has been surprisingly sparse, considering his contribution to the mercantile history of Glasgow. This is a fact that was recognised in 1881 by George Stewart, who in his collection, Glasgow's Old Commercial Aristocracy, noted that Glassford was, at one time the very prince of Glasgow merchants, and now almost forgotten.